Arcadius, born Flavius Arcadius, was born in 377 AD. He was born in Hispania and had a standard Roman education with the tutors Arsenius and Themistius. He would be co-Augustus with his father Theodosius from 383 to 395, and would rule in his own right from 395 to 408 AD. And at the beginning of his reign, upon his father's death in 395 AD, he would immediately be dominated by Rufinus, a Praetorian prefect who turned out to dominate Arcadius in the year 395. And he was so ambitious that he even wanted his daughter to marry Arcadius. But eventually, Arcadius decided to marry a woman named Aelia Eudoxia. And this made Rufinus presumably quite mad, but he still managed to keep his hold on the power. And a rebellion under the Visigoths really distracted anybody from focusing on these things. So Alaric I, knowing that Theodosius just died, revolted under the Visigoths. And Stilicho, a prominent general from the west, came over as he was very ambitious and wanted to also gain influence in the east. He came over to try to fight the Visigoths. But Arcadius and Rufinus feared Stilicho more than they did about the revolting Goths, because they were just dirty barbarians who really couldn't mess with them. At least that's what they thought. And so they stalled his advance in trying to fight the Visigoths. Now Stilicho was presumably quite mad over this, and had Rufinus killed and assassinated by Goths. And Rufinus died and really managed to be quite ineffective, because Stilicho may have actually been really good against the Goths, as he went to be a good general in the west at least. Although Stilicho was really destabilizing the situation, as he probably knew the Eastern court would not accept him as an overlord. But he eventually had a blockade against the Visigoths, and they retreated to Epirus and would eventually go on to the west, and they would no longer be the Eastern Roman Empire's problem. After the fall of Rufinus, Stilicho left, and Eutropius and Arcadius' wife, Aelia Eudoxia, quickly filled the power vacuum. And Eutropius would eventually defeat some Huns in Armenia and would get the title of consulship. Now, Eutropius was a eunuch, and this would be the only time in Roman history where a eunuch would be granted the title of consul, which used to be the highest rank of the Roman Republic, aside from maybe censor. And so this made a ton of the Roman elite mad that a eunuch could get this type of power, and because they were still in an age where being a eunuch was seen as very not masculine, and the Romans were heavily misogynist, and they viewed this as a terrible thing for Eutropius to do. But eventually, some Ostrogoths in Anatolia revolted under a leader named Tribigild. Arcadius would send a force under an officer named Leo, which eventually would be defeated, and then another one under a general named Gynos. Gynos would said that basically you couldn't defeat the Ostrogoths. They were in quite a good position, and we should just give in to the demands. And they revolted because Eutropius was granted the title of consul, and they hated Eutropius, and they wanted him gone. So after some convincing by his wife, Eutropius was exiled and eventually executed by Arcadius. And now the power vacuum would be filled by his wife, Aelia Eudoxia. And after this, Gynos would join the rebelling Ostrogoths and would be a problem as he was just revolting. But eventually Gynos would be killed by Odin the Hun. And this would be the first time the Huns went into Roman history, at least in our story. And the Huns were increasing in power, and they were in Ukraine, and they were kicking out many barbarians. And that's why there were many barbarians that were going across the border into Rome. And this would prove a problem much later on for the West and the East. So now we have Arcadius's wife. Since Eutropius was killed and Gainos was killed, she was the sole power left to manipulate Arcadius. And she did this pretty well, but there was a archbishop named John, and he hated wealthy women and was pretty misogynist. He also hated wealthy men, but he specifically targeted wealthy women. And so she started supporting rival bishops, but he was incredibly popular. So the people rioted, and he managed to stay in power. But then she supported a different bishop named Theophilus, who had a synod, and eventually convinced Arcadius to banish John, the rival. Uh, and this was really good with Eudoxia. And since John was gone, she was the only one left, because John was really a major rival for her, especially since he was powerful in his religious position. But eventually she would die in the same year and held on to power for a short period of time, at least by herself. After Aelia's death, Anthemius, the Praetorian prefect, would come to power and would rule for Arcadius from 404 to 408, and would largely be competent and would just be good for the empire and promote stability that had been gone since all the dynastic and court politics that had been going on before this time. Arcadius, the emperor, would die on the 1st of May, 408 AD. He would be buried, like his predecessors, in the Church of Holy Apostles, and this would mark the death of Arcadius and the promotion of his son, Theodosius II. So was Arcadius a good Roman emperor? I would put him at F tier as a largely incompetent Roman emperor. We even barely talked about Arcadius because he was mostly just dominated by people around him. His wife, Rufinus, Eutropius, Anthemius. He never cared about ruling and just was largely incompetent and very sickly. Although one point of praise for him, he wasn't as bad as his co-emperor in the West, Honorius, who actively made things worse. So that's the end of the video. Subscribe, comment, like, and goodbye.